Imagine if the most debated book in human history was not just a book of faith, but a book supported by real historical evidence. What if ancient discoveries, Roman records, and archaeological findings pointed toward the truth behind the Bible and Jesus Christ? Tonight, we are not discussing blind belief. We are exploring facts, history, and evidence that continue to challenge skeptics around the world. From buried cities mentioned in Scripture to non-Christian historians who wrote about Jesus, this journey may completely change the way you see Christianity. Stay with me until the end, because some of the evidence you're about to hear is truly astonishing. For centuries, people have argued that the Bible is nothing more than a collection of myths, legends, and stories invented to control civilizations. Critics mocked it, rulers tried to ban it, and skeptics predicted its disappearance. Yet despite every attack, the Bible remains the most studied, translated, and discussed book in human history. The question is, why? What makes this ancient text survive while thousands of other ancient writings disappeared into dust? The answer becomes even more fascinating when we begin examining the historical evidence surrounding it. Many people assume faith and evidence are enemies. They believe that if someone believes in the Bible, they must ignore history, science, and archaeology. But what happens when archaeology begins uncovering places, kings, cities, and events mentioned in biblical texts? What happens when discoveries buried underground for thousands of years suddenly match descriptions written in Scripture centuries earlier? This is where the conversation changes completely. Take the ancient city of Jericho, for example. For years, critics claimed biblical stories about ancient civilizations were fictional. But archaeological excavations revealed remains of ancient walls and destruction layers matching historical periods connected to biblical accounts. Then there is the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the modern age. Hidden inside caves near the Dead Sea were ancient manuscripts dating back over 2,000 years. These texts contained portions of the Old Testament that matched remarkably with modern biblical translations. Imagine the impact of that discovery. A text copied and preserved across centuries with astonishing consistency. That is not the survival of a random book. That is the preservation of a document people considered sacred enough to protect with their lives. And the deeper researchers dig, the more connections appear. Ancient inscriptions mentioning kings described in the Bible were discovered. Places once dismissed as imaginary turned out to be real historical locations. Archaeologists uncovered evidence connected to ancient Israelite culture, customs, and governance. Suddenly, stories that skeptics labeled as myths started gaining historical context. Even scholars who are not religious admit that the Bible contains significant historical material connected to real civilizations and real events. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing is not just what was discovered, it is how the Bible survived at all. Think about this carefully. These writings passed through wars, invasions, empires, persecution, and centuries without modern technology. Entire kingdoms collapsed, libraries burned, civilizations vanished, yet biblical texts continued spreading across continents. People copied them by hand with extreme precision because they believed every word mattered. Some even died protecting those writings from destruction. Roman emperors attempted to eliminate Christian scriptures. During periods of persecution, believers were imprisoned and executed for possessing biblical texts, yet the Bible continued to spread. History shows that the harder people tried to destroy it, the more influence it gained. That alone raises a powerful question. Why were people willing to sacrifice everything for these writings? Why would ordinary men and women face death instead of denying what they believed was true? Another fascinating area is manuscript evidence. Compared to other ancient books, the Bible stands in a category of its own. Historians often trust ancient works written by philosophers and emperors, even when only a handful of manuscript copies exist, sometimes copied hundreds of years after the originals. But the New Testament alone has thousands of manuscript copies in different languages from different regions. This allows scholars to compare texts and verify consistency with remarkable accuracy. The amount of preserved material is extraordinary compared to most ancient literature accepted by historians without question. And then there are the prophecies. Some biblical passages appear to describe kingdoms, rulers, and historical events long before they happened. This has fascinated scholars for generations. Whether someone approaches the Bible with faith or skepticism, they cannot deny that these writings influence civilizations, laws, cultures, and millions of lives across history. Now, some people may say, historical evidence does not automatically prove every miracle happened. That is true. History cannot place miracles under a microscope. But what historical evidence can do is establish whether the people, places, and events surrounding the Bible existed in reality. And when evidence repeatedly supports the historical framework of Scripture, the discussion becomes impossible to ignore. What makes this even more powerful is that the Bible never presents itself as mythology. It speaks through names, locations, rulers, genealogies, and timelines. It roots its message within human history. That is very different from fictional legends detached from reality. The writers described real cities, political leaders, and cultural conditions known to their audiences. As discoveries continue, many historical details once questioned are now taken more seriously by scholars than ever before. But here is where the story becomes truly gripping. The historical discussion does not stop with the Bible itself, because eventually, every road leads to one central figure, Jesus Christ. And this is where debates become intense across the world. Was Jesus merely a religious symbol created by followers? Or was he an actual historical person who walked the earth? Even many atheist and non-Christian historians acknowledge that Jesus existed historically. Roman historians, Jewish writers, and ancient records outside the Bible mention him and the movement that formed after his death. Think about the impact of that reality. A man born in a small region under Roman occupation changed the course of human civilization forever. Entire calendars are based around his life. Billions know his name. Nations were transformed because of his teachings. Yet the question remains, who exactly was he? And why did his followers become willing to suffer torture and death rather than deny what they claimed to witness? Because once we move beyond the archaeological discoveries and preserved manuscripts, we enter another layer of evidence, testimonies from ancient historians outside the Bible itself. And what those records reveal becomes one of the most compelling parts of this entire discussion. When historians investigate ancient figures, they usually ask one simple question first: did this person actually exist? Surprisingly, when it comes to Jesus Christ, the debate among serious historians is far smaller than many people imagine. While arguments continue about his identity, miracles, and resurrection, the existence of Jesus as a historical person is accepted by a large number of scholars, including many who are not Christians at all. That alone shocks many people because popular culture often creates the impression that Jesus was invented by religion. But history tells a far more fascinating story. Think about it carefully. If Jesus never existed, how did a movement begin so rapidly in the very place where he was supposedly crucified? Why would thousands suddenly dedicate their lives to spreading his teachings while facing imprisonment, torture, and death? Movements based entirely on fiction usually collapse quickly when challenged by authorities. Yet Christianity exploded across the Roman Empire within decades. Something powerful happened in history that changed ordinary people into fearless messengers. One of the strongest reasons historians accept the existence of Jesus is because references to him appear outside the Bible. Ancient Roman and Jewish writers mention Jesus and the early Christian movement even though they were not followers of Christianity. This is critically important because it means evidence about Jesus does not come only from Christian sources. The Roman historian Tacitus, considered one of Rome's greatest historians, wrote about Christians and referred to Christus, who suffered execution during the reign of Emperor Tiberius under Pontius Pilate. Think about the significance of that statement. Tacitus was not trying to defend Christianity. In fact, He viewed Christians negatively, yet even he confirmed key historical details connected to Jesus. Then there was Josephus, a Jewish historian writing in the 1st century. He mentioned Jesus in his historical works and referred to him as a wise teacher who attracted followers. Josephus also recorded the execution of James, identified as the brother of Jesus. Again, this matters because these references come from outside the New Testament. Another Roman writer, Pliny the Younger, described early Christians gathering to worship Christ as divine. This tells historians something astonishing. Within a relatively short time after Jesus' death, people across regions of the Roman Empire were already worshiping him, even under threat of persecution. Now pause for a moment and imagine the historical atmosphere of that time. The Roman Empire was one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. Crucifixion was designed not only to kill people, but to humiliate them publicly. A man executed in such a way would normally disappear from history forever. Yet Jesus did the opposite. His influence expanded so dramatically that the empire, which once persecuted Christians, eventually embraced Christianity itself. That is historically extraordinary. And the details surrounding Jesus become even more compelling when we examine the Gospels. Some critics claim the Gospel writers invented stories generations later. But many scholars argue that parts of the New Testament were written much earlier than people assume, close enough to the events that eyewitnesses were still alive. This is significant because false stories are far easier to challenge when witnesses can still expose them. The Gospel accounts also include details historians often associate with authentic testimony. They mention specific towns, cultural customs, political figures, and geographic locations known from history. Archaeological discoveries continue confirming many of these details. Names of rulers, priests, and officials mentioned in Scripture have been supported by historical findings. The Pool of Bethesda, once questioned by skeptics, was later uncovered by archaeologists in Jerusalem. Even Pontius Pilate himself, once doubted by some critics, became more historically grounded after inscriptions connected to him were discovered. But perhaps one of the strongest arguments for authenticity lies in the embarrassing details preserved within the accounts. Ancient writers inventing heroic legends usually avoid including weaknesses, failures, or humiliating moments about their leaders. Yet the Gospels openly describe the disciples misunderstanding Jesus, doubting him, abandoning him in fear, and even denying him publicly. Peter, one of Christianity's central figures, is shown failing repeatedly. Women are described as the first witnesses to the empty tomb, a surprising detail in a society where female testimony carried less legal weight. If someone were fabricating propaganda in that culture, they likely would not structure the story this way. Historians often see these uncomfortable details as signs that the writers were reporting what they believe truly happened rather than crafting polished mythology. Then there is the crucifixion itself. Even skeptical scholars widely accept that Jesus was crucified under Roman authority. Why? Because crucifixion was a brutal and shameful death. Inventing a Messiah who died this way would have made little sense in the ancient world. Many Jews expected a victorious political leader, not someone executed publicly. Yet Christians centered their entire message around the crucifixion. That historical reality forces an important question. Why would followers continue proclaiming a crucified leader unless they were utterly convinced something happened afterward that changed everything? And this is where history begins colliding with mystery. The disciples who once hid in fear suddenly became bold preachers willing to die for their message. Christianity spread despite severe persecution. Men and women faced lions, prisons, torture, and execution rather than deny their belief in Jesus. People may die for something they mistakenly believe is true, but very few willingly die for something they know is invented. That transformation in the earliest followers remains one of the most debated aspects of Christian history. Of course, historians cannot scientifically prove miracles. History works by examining documents, testimonies, cultural context, and evidence. But what historians can confirm is that Jesus existed, he was crucified, and his followers genuinely believed they witnessed something life-changing after his death. That belief transformed the ancient world forever. And the deeper we investigate, the clearer it becomes that Christianity did not emerge in a vacuum. It appeared within a real historical environment filled with political tension, Roman power, Jewish traditions, and eyewitness claims. Every layer of evidence pulls us further into the ancient world where this movement began. But perhaps the most fascinating discoveries come from the records of people who never intended to support Christianity at all. Historians, officials, and writers whose testimonies unexpectedly became some of the strongest historical anchors connected to Jesus and the rise of early Christians. What makes this entire discussion even more dramatic is that some of the strongest historical references connected to Jesus and early Christianity came from people who were never trying to promote the Christian faith. These were Roman officials, Jewish historians, political writers, and observers documenting events happening around them. They had no reason to help Christianity grow. In some cases, they actually disliked Christians. Yet their writings unintentionally became powerful historical evidence that something extraordinary happened in the first century. Imagine discovering independent witnesses from ancient history confirming that a movement centered around Jesus spread rapidly across the Roman Empire despite persecution, executions, and public hatred. That is exactly what historians found when examining records outside the Bible. These ancient voices create a fascinating puzzle because they repeatedly point toward the same historical reality. Jesus lived, was crucified, and his followers believed he rose again. One of the most significant figures in this discussion is Tacitus, the Roman historian known for his careful recording of Roman events. Around the early 2nd century, Tacitus wrote about Emperor Nero blaming Christians for the Great Fire of Rome. While describing Christians, he referred to Christus, stating that he suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius under Pontius Pilate. This statement may appear simple at first, but historians consider it extremely important. Why? Because Tacitus was not copying Christian propaganda. He was a Roman historian documenting political events, and yet he confirmed central elements of the gospel narrative: the existence of Jesus, his execution, and the rise of Christianity shortly afterward. Then there is Suetonius, another Roman historian who wrote about disturbances connected to followers of Christus in Rome. Although scholars debate certain details, his writings still reveal that Christianity had become noticeable enough to attract the attention of Roman authorities very early in history. And perhaps even more fascinating is Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor who wrote letters to Emperor Trajan asking how Christians should be punished. In his letters, Pliny described Christians gathering before dawn, singing hymns to Christ as to a god, and refusing to worship Roman deities. Think about what this means historically. Within decades after Jesus' death, ordinary men and women across regions of the empire were already worshiping him as divine, despite facing persecution and possible execution. Now imagine the risk involved in that decision. Christianity was not popular. It was dangerous. Following Jesus could cost someone their family, status, property, or life. Yet the movement continued growing. Historians look at that explosive growth and ask an unavoidable question. What convinced these people so deeply that they were willing to suffer for it? Jewish historical sources also contribute important information. Josephus, one of the most respected Jewish historians of the 1st century, referred to Jesus as a wise teacher and miracle worker who attracted followers among Jews and Gentiles. He also confirmed the execution of James, identified as the brother of Jesus. Even though scholars debate whether later Christian scribes slightly modified portions of Josephus's writings, most agree that the references themselves are rooted in authentic historical material. Another remarkable source comes from the Babylonian Talmud, a collection of Jewish traditions and discussions. While often hostile toward Christianity, certain passages appear to reference Jesus and his execution around Passover. Again, this matters because even critics and opponents indirectly acknowledged his existence. When multiple independent sources from different backgrounds mention the same figure, historians pay close attention. Roman writers, Jewish historians, government officials, and Christian texts all converge around one historical person, Jesus of Nazareth. That level of historical convergence is difficult to dismiss casually. But the evidence becomes even more compelling when we consider how early these testimonies emerged. In ancient history, the gap between events and surviving records is often enormous. Yet many New Testament writings appeared relatively close to the lifetime of eyewitnesses. Some scholars believe early creeds about Jesus' death and resurrection were circulating within just a few years after the crucifixion. That is incredibly early by ancient historical standards. Take the writings of Paul, for example. His letters are among the earliest Christian documents we possess. Paul personally knew key figures connected to the early church, including Peter and James. In one passage, he refers to an early Christian creed describing Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and appearances to witnesses. Historians believe this creed may trace back to the earliest years of Christianity itself. This means belief in the resurrection was not a legend invented centuries later. It appeared immediately at the foundation of the movement. And this raises another gripping question. If the resurrection story were fabricated, why did opponents fail to stop Christianity at its source? Remember, these events were being proclaimed in Jerusalem, the very city where Jesus was executed. Authorities had every reason to crush the movement quickly. Yet instead of disappearing, Christianity spread rapidly across regions and cultures. Some historians argue that the willingness of early Christians to suffer persecution reveals the sincerity of their beliefs. Again, sincerity alone does not automatically prove every claim true. But it does challenge the idea that the movement was built on deliberate deception. The disciples gained no wealth, political power, or comfort from preaching Christ. Many faced imprisonment, torture, exile, or death, and still they continued. The Roman Empire itself unintentionally preserved evidence about Christianity because officials repeatedly documented attempts to control or punish Christians. These records show that the movement was viewed as disruptive precisely because followers refused to worship the emperor or Roman gods. Their loyalty to Jesus stood above fear of imperial power. And then there is the astonishing transformation of Christianity's reputation over time. At first, Christians were mocked, hunted, and blamed for disasters. Yet within a few centuries, Christianity spread throughout the empire so powerfully that Roman emperors eventually legalized and embraced it. That reversal remains one of the most dramatic transformations in world history. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect is this. None of these non-Christian writers were trying to build a case for faith. They were simply recording events, political tensions, trials, executions, and social movements. Yet together, their testimonies create a historical framework supporting the existence of Jesus and the explosive rise of Christianity. As historians continue studying ancient records, archaeology, and manuscripts, the picture becomes increasingly vivid. Christianity was not born in mythology floating outside reality. It emerged in the middle of real cities, real governments, real rulers, and real conflicts. And the physical discoveries buried beneath the earth for centuries would soon add another layer of evidence that stunned even some of the strongest skeptics. And as this picture continues to unfold through ancient writings and historical testimonies, another layer of evidence begins to emerge from a completely different field, one that does not rely on manuscripts or written records alone, but on physical discoveries buried beneath sand, stone, and time itself. Archaeology, in many ways, has become one of the most unexpected contributors to this discussion, because stones do not have beliefs, and buried cities do not have agendas. They simply reveal what was there. For centuries, skeptics argued that many places, names, and events described in the Bible were symbolic or exaggerated. They claimed that ancient biblical accounts were too detailed, too specific, or too culturally rich to be historically reliable. But then something began to happen that changed the tone of academic debate. Archaeologists started digging in regions connected to biblical narratives, especially in areas like the ancient Near East, and what they uncovered did not always match skepticism. Instead, it often matched scripture with surprising precision. Take ancient cities once mentioned in biblical narratives that were long dismissed as legendary. Places like Jericho, Hazor, and Megiddo were debated for years in academic circles. Some scholars question whether these cities even existed in the form described in ancient texts. But as excavations continued, ruins were uncovered that revealed complex ancient civilizations, fortifications, destruction layers, and settlement patterns that aligned with historical timelines consistent with ancient accounts. In the case of Jericho, for example, archaeologists discovered collapsed walls and evidence of sudden destruction, sparking intense debate among researchers about how such patterns fit into the broader historical timeline of the region. And what makes these discoveries so compelling is not just that a single site aligns with a narrative, but that multiple sites across different regions show patterns of historical consistency. Ancient cities mentioned in various biblical texts are not isolated references. They form part of a broader geographical and cultural map. When archaeologists find inscriptions, pottery, architectural remains, and city layouts that correspond to these locations, it strengthens the argument that the biblical writers were describing real environments, not imaginary landscapes. Then there are inscriptions, perhaps some of the most powerful archaeological pieces of evidence because they are direct messages from ancient people themselves. One of the most famous examples is the discovery of inscriptions referencing the House of David. For a long time, some scholars debated whether King David was purely a legendary figure. But inscriptions found outside the Bible provided evidence that a dynastic line associated with David was recognized in ancient history. This shifted the conversation significantly in academic research. Another remarkable discovery involves Assyrian records. The Assyrians were known for meticulously documenting military campaigns and political events. In their records, they mention kings and places that also appear in biblical narratives, including rulers of Israel and Judah. These external confirmations are important because they come from empires that were often in conflict with the people described in the Bible. In other words, these are not friendly sources trying to support biblical claims. They are independent political records documenting their own historical perspective, which happens to overlap with biblical accounts. Even everyday artifacts have contributed to this growing body of evidence. Seals, tablets, and ancient administrative records have been discovered bearing names that appear in biblical genealogies and royal lineages. These small objects, often overlooked at first glance, help historians reconstruct the administrative and cultural systems of ancient societies described in Scripture. When multiple artifacts from different locations and time periods show consistent naming patterns and cultural practices, it suggests continuity between the biblical world and archaeological reality. And perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of archaeology is how it reveals the accuracy of cultural details within the Bible. Ancient texts often describe customs, rituals, legal systems, and daily life in ways that align with what archaeologists have uncovered about the ancient Near East. Marriage customs, agricultural practices, trade routes, and even dietary laws show similarities with known historical practices of surrounding civilizations. This does not automatically prove theological claims, but it does demonstrate that the biblical writers were deeply embedded in a real historical context. One striking example often discussed by scholars is the Pool of Bethesda, described in the Gospel of John. For many years, skeptics argued that this location was fictional because no archaeological evidence had been found. However, excavations in Jerusalem eventually uncovered a site matching the description, including pools, columns, and surrounding structures consistent with the biblical narrative. Discoveries like this do not appear frequently in ancient studies. When they do, they force researchers to reconsider previous assumptions. Another example involves the Pool of Siloam, a significant location in Jerusalem mentioned in biblical accounts. Archaeologists uncovered the pool and surrounding infrastructure, confirming that the site existed exactly where ancient texts placed it. This kind of precision is important because it shows that the geographical details in the biblical narrative are not random or symbolic, but grounded in actual locations. And then there are discoveries related to governance and political structures. References to governors, priests, and officials mentioned in biblical texts have often been questioned in the past. Yet archaeological findings, including inscriptions and seals, have confirmed the existence of several individuals and administrative systems described in ancient records, even small artifacts like stamped clay seals used in official documentation. Help confirm the administrative world described in historical texts. What makes archaeology so powerful in this discussion is that it evolves over time. New discoveries are still being made today, and each excavation has the potential to add another piece to the puzzle. Unlike written opinions or philosophical debates, archaeological evidence physically exists. It can be examined, reanalyzed, and studied independently by researchers from different backgrounds. And as these discoveries accumulate, they do not necessarily answer every theological question, but they consistently reinforce one crucial idea. The biblical narrative is deeply connected to real geography, real cultures, and real historical environments. It is not floating in abstraction. It is anchored in the physical world that archaeologists continue to uncover layer by layer. This intersection between ancient writings, external historical records, and physical archaeological discoveries creates a complex and increasingly detailed picture. It suggests that the world described in biblical texts was not imagined in isolation, but existed within a broader historical framework shared with neighboring civilizations. And as researchers continue to dig deeper into ancient soil, both literally and academically, more connections between archaeology and ancient scripture continue to surface, gradually reshaping how history itself is understood. And as these layers of archaeology continue to reshape how scholars view the ancient world, another question naturally rises in the background of this entire discussion. If these texts are so ancient, how have they survived at all? How did writings composed in a world without printing presses, without digital storage, and without modern preservation methods manage to reach us across thousands of years with such remarkable continuity? This is where the story of manuscript preservation becomes one of the most astonishing parts of the entire historical debate. To understand this, you first have to imagine the ancient world as it truly was. No photocopiers, no archives protected by climate control, no digital backups. Every single copy of an important text had to be written by hand, letter by letter, word by word, line by line. One small mistake could alter meaning. One generation of neglect could erase an entire document from history. And yet, against all odds, biblical texts survived through centuries of wars, migrations, persecutions, and the collapse of empires that once dominated the known world. When historians compare the Bible to other ancient writings, something very striking appears. Many classical works that are widely accepted today, such as writings by Plato, Aristotle, or Caesar, survive in only a small number of manuscripts, sometimes written centuries after the original authors lived. Scholars still consider these texts reliable sources for studying ancient history. But when it comes to the New Testament, the number of manuscript copies is significantly larger than most ancient works combined. Thousands of manuscripts exist in Greek, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, and other early languages, allowing scholars to compare versions and identify consistency across different regions and time periods. This level of manuscript abundance is not common in ancient literature. It means that instead of relying on a single fragile chain of copies, the New Testament tradition is supported by a wide network of early textual witnesses. When scholars examine these manuscripts, they are able to trace how the text was transmitted across generations, and surprisingly, the core message remains remarkably stable. But the survival of these texts is not just about numbers. It is also about the conditions under which they were preserved. Early Christian communities did not treat these writings as ordinary literature. They treated them as sacred, valuable, and worth protecting even at great personal cost. In times of persecution, believers risked imprisonment and death simply for possessing these texts. Historical accounts describe how scriptures were hidden, copied secretly, and passed carefully from one believer to another to ensure they were not lost. Think about the intensity of that commitment. In an age where owning such writings could lead to execution, people still chose to preserve them. That alone tells you something about the value they placed on these documents. Preservation was not casual, it was intentional, disciplined, and often dangerous. As Christianity spread across regions and cultures, the need for translation became essential. The texts were translated into multiple languages very early in their history. This is another reason why manuscript evidence is so rich. Different communities preserved the same teachings in their own linguistic traditions. When modern scholars compare these early translations, they are able to cross-check accuracy across linguistic boundaries. Instead of weakening the reliability of the text, this diversity actually strengthens it, because it allows independent lines of transmission to be compared. One of the most fascinating discoveries in this field came from ancient manuscripts found in places like the deserts of Egypt. Dry climates preserved fragile documents that would have otherwise decayed in humid environments. Among these finds were early fragments of New Testament writings that date very close to the original composition period. These fragments provide a snapshot of how early the texts were circulating among Christian communities. And as scholars continue analyzing these manuscripts, they consistently find that while minor variations exist, such as spelling differences or word order changes, the central message remains intact. This is important because it shows that the transmission process, despite being manual and spread across centuries, preserved the essential content with a high degree of fidelity. But beyond the technical details of manuscript comparison lies something even more profound. The sheer survival of these texts through history is itself remarkable. Consider the number of civilizations that have risen and fallen since these writings were first produced. Empires like Rome, Persia, and others shaped the ancient world, yet none of them managed to erase these texts completely. Libraries burned, cities were destroyed, political systems changed, yet these writings continued to be copied, read, and preserved. There were also periods in history when preservation was not guaranteed at all. Political instability, invasions, and cultural shifts often threatened written traditions. In many ancient societies, entire bodies of literature were lost simply because they were not continuously copied or valued by later generations. The fact that biblical manuscripts survived such transitions suggests a continuous chain of preservation supported by communities that remained committed to maintaining them. Another important aspect is the role of early scholars and scribes. These individuals were trained in meticulous copying techniques. In some traditions, scribes developed strict methods to ensure accuracy when reproducing texts. While no manual process is perfect, the discipline applied to copying sacred writings helped reduce errors and maintain consistency across generations. This careful approach contributed significantly to the preservation of the texts we have today. And as we examine this entire process, something becomes increasingly clear. The survival of these writings is not accidental. It is the result of sustained effort across centuries, involving countless individuals who believed these texts were worth preserving at any cost. That belief alone shaped the transmission history of the Bible in a way that is difficult to ignore when studying ancient literature. But manuscript survival is only one part of the picture. As these texts spread across cultures and were preserved in different languages, they also began influencing societies in ways that extended far beyond religious practice. Laws, ethics, education systems, and cultural values across continents were shaped by the ideas contained within these writings. And that influence, preserved through manuscripts, continues to echo into the modern world, connecting ancient scribes to present-day readers in a continuous historical chain that stretches across millennia. And when we reach this point in the discussion, after examining archaeology, ancient historians, manuscript preservation, and the historical existence of Jesus, a final and deeply thought-provoking question naturally emerges: how do we actually interpret all of this? Because evidence, no matter how strong, always invites interpretation. And interpretation is where the tension between faith and reason often appears most sharply. For centuries, people have treated faith and evidence as if they belong to two completely separate worlds. On one side, you have the world of belief, emotion, and spirituality. On the other side, you have history, science, and reason. Many assume these two must constantly clash. But when we look closely at the historical material surrounding the Bible and Jesus, something unexpected begins to appear. The boundary between faith and evidence is not as rigid as many assume. Instead, they often interact in ways that challenge simplistic separation. Historians themselves are careful about what they can and cannot claim. Historical study can confirm whether a person existed, whether an event likely happened, and whether certain documents reflect real cultural contexts, but it cannot place miracles inside a laboratory. It cannot replay ancient events under controlled conditions. That limitation is not a weakness of history. It is simply the nature of studying the past. History deals with probability, testimony, and surviving evidence, not experimental replication. And this is where the discussion becomes especially interesting. Because while history cannot prove miracles in a scientific sense, it can examine whether the surrounding claims make sense within their historical environment. For example, we have already seen that early Christians believed something extraordinary happened after the crucifixion of Jesus. That belief was not formed centuries later. It appears in the earliest layers of Christian tradition. The question then becomes not only what they believed, but why they believed it so strongly that they were willing to face persecution and death. Even skeptical historians agree on certain core facts. Jesus was crucified. His followers claimed he appeared to them afterward, and the movement grew rapidly in the very region where these events allegedly occurred. These are not theological claims. They are historical observations based on early sources. But the interpretation of those facts varies widely depending on worldview. Some argue that the disciples experienced visions or psychological experiences. Others suggest misinterpretation or evolving tradition, and others argue different philosophical explanations. But what remains consistent across most scholarly discussions is that something significant must have happened to produce such a powerful and enduring movement in such a short time. And this brings us to the idea that faith, in its historical context, is not necessarily the absence of evidence. Rather, it is often a response to interpreted evidence. The earliest followers of Jesus did not claim belief based on abstract philosophy alone. They rooted their convictions in what they believed were real events in history. That is why they were willing to anchor their entire lives to those claims, even when it brought suffering. At the same time, skeptics emphasize that historical evidence always leaves room for multiple interpretations. Ancient texts can be analyzed in different ways. Archaeological discoveries can support cultural context without confirming theological meaning. Manuscript consistency can show careful transmission without proving divine origin. And historical references outside the Bible can confirm existence without confirming doctrine. This is where the conversation becomes intellectually honest, recognizing both the strength of the evidence and the limits of what that evidence can prove. Yet, even with these limitations, one thing becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. The Bible and the story of Jesus are deeply embedded in real historical frameworks. They are not floating myths disconnected from time and place. They are grounded in specific geography, political systems, cultural practices, and documented historical figures. This grounding forces anyone studying the topic seriously to engage with it at the level of history, not just symbolism. And perhaps the most striking aspect of all is how this historical foundation continues to influence the modern world. Whether one approaches the Bible as sacred scripture or as historical literature, its impact is undeniable. Legal systems, ethical frameworks, art, literature, education, and cultural traditions across continents have been shaped in ways that trace back to these ancient writings and the movement that followed Jesus. This influence raises another profound question. How does a movement that began in a small, politically occupied region become one of the most influential forces in global history? How does a message spread from a small group of followers in the ancient world to billions of people across continents, languages, and centuries? Historians examine social networks, cultural exchange, political transitions, and human psychology to explain such growth. But the scale and endurance of this particular movement remain one of the most studied phenomena in historical analysis. And even today, the discussion is not settled in a simple way. Scholars continue to debate interpretations, analyze new discoveries, and refine understanding. Archaeological research continues, manuscripts continue to be studied. Ancient inscriptions continue to be analyzed. Each new discovery does not necessarily close the debate, but often deepens it, adding more detail to a story that has already spanned millennia. What makes this entire subject so compelling is not just the evidence itself, but the fact that it continues to invite questions across generations. Some approach it with belief, others with skepticism, and many with curiosity. But regardless of perspective, the historical record surrounding the Bible and Jesus remains one of the most extensively examined subjects in human history. And as all these strands come together, archaeology beneath ancient cities, inscriptions carved by forgotten empires, manuscripts preserved through centuries of danger, and historical accounts from both supporters and critics, they form a complex tapestry that continues to draw attention, challenge assumptions, and invite deeper exploration into one of the most influential stories ever recorded in human civilization.